Hi everyone, and welcome to Learning Plan 6. This is where we're really going to start to cover interventions. So we have a set of risk and protective factors. We have a kiddo or a family who's at risk of delinquency, drug use, mental health, child abuse, you name it, any of these risk factors that we see. And what do we do about it? This is where I get really excited about, it's great to learn about issues, it's great to have a foundation, but how can I truly do something within my community? So what this learning plan does, it's kind of twofold, is it focuses on the first thing, which is evidence-based programming. You should have already learned a little bit about this in some of your introductory classes, but evidence-based programming is basically the understanding of how effective is an intervention, how effective is the services that we're putting in place, and how do we measure that? So what they're really starting to do, especially in the days of tight budgets, is say, okay, what program are you using, and how do you know it works? I'll give you an example. So my colleague Jeff Gato and I started an outpatient program for sexual offenders within the community, particularly juveniles. What I noticed as a social worker, my entire caseload was sexual offenders, was that there were a lot of kids who were being placed in residential because we couldn't provide the services for them in the community. It didn't necessarily mean that they needed interventions that were that significant, but it did mean that they needed treatment, and I couldn't risk the safety of the community, keeping them in the community if there weren't going to be adequate resources. What I also noticed is that kids were staying in residential treatment longer than they needed to because there were no services to transition them out of residential placement. So I noticed a need. I also noticed several kids and families who had a tremendous amount of risk factors that could only be mitigated by placing them in residential treatment. So what Jeff and I did, he's a therapist at, was a therapist at Homie Home, working with sexual offenders, was created a program, knowing that evidence says that a comprehensive approach of individual, group, and family therapy is what works. We created a program to meet those needs. So what we did within the community was we created some specialized treatment foster care homes that would take kiddos if they couldn't stay within the home. A lot of times kids couldn't stay in the home because their victims lived there. So we would place them in a treatment foster care home where the foster parents had the proper safety measures put in place. They didn't have small children living there, and that those kiddos were the only ones that were there. So they were able to provide a safe environment, a supportive environment, but also at the same time provide some of the community safety that was needed. So that was their particular living residence while they were going through the program. Some kids remained within their home because they were safe enough to be in their home if we were providing intensive in-home group and individual therapy. So what we did was we assessed the kids based on risk factors, several different risk factors and different indicators as to how risky they were, and we placed them within a different tier of service. So all of the kids that were within our program were receiving individual, group, and intensive in-home or family therapy. And what we found that this was extremely effective in not only reducing the recidivism rate. I believe in about the 50 kids that we served, one of them reoffended sexually. So that's a pretty amazing success rate. Keeping in mind most juvenile sex offenders don't ever once they receive treatment, that is, reoffend sexually. They'll reoffend by stealing a car or doing some sort of more static offense. Status offense, excuse me. But that's a whole other tangent, and I won't go there. What I'm trying to illustrate is that Jeff and I had to go before the board to ask for funding, to say, will you please fund this program? Will you please give us money to work with these kids? And we had to tell them why we needed the money and why we believed this program was going to work. And then while we were implementing the program, we had to measure it. So we had to say, okay, how many months earlier are kids getting out of residential? How many residential placements are we preventing based on these services? And it's hard sometimes to measure the act of things that haven't occurred. So it's hard to measure um, whether or not an intervention worked if the offense never occurred. So how do you measure how many sexual offenses didn't occur? How do you measure how many families were reunited quickly? I think what it is and what you try to do is quantify what didn't work in the past. So we did a lot of those things, and arguably our program is evidence-based, based on things that do work. And so we created a program based on things that already worked, and then modeled it off to that, and then continued to research. It's been implemented for almost 4 years now, and continue to measure it. And it still is extremely effective. So that's what I mean by evidence-based, is finding an unmet need. So we had all of these kids that couldn't stay in the community, or were going to residential and shouldn't, or were staying in residential placement and shouldn't stay there as long as they were. And we saw this unmet need, but then we had to create programming that worked. So if we created something that didn't work, it wouldn't matter. And I think what has been happening in the past is so many programs are just created willy-nilly, and we don't know whether or not they actually work. So that's what the emphasis of this particular learning plan is, creating programs that we know work, that we know will meet the risk factors, that we know will reduce the risk factors and will prevent further issues and or stop some of the issues that families are facing. So for example, birth to 3, we use those services knowing that early interventions with kiddos who are facing developmental delays is absolutely critical. But we also know that there's a combination of in-home, occupational therapy, physical therapy if needed, behavioral therapy modification, working with parents, etc. We know that works. We know going in-home works better than bringing them to a facility. So we want to make sure that the services we're providing work. And a lot of it is keeping in mind that we can't just create programs anymore. We have to make sure that they're working. Also keeping in mind that evidence-based programming is best practice for our clients. It's strength-based. It allows them to be active and engaged with their treatment, but also keeping in mind it's harmful to provide interventions to clients that don't work. It's asking them to reveal their most private thoughts and feelings, to be kind of our guinea pigs, and it's not fair. It's also wasting clients' time, families' time, our time. It's also wasting precious, precious money that could be used in a more effective way. So I think it's just keeping in mind that we have an obligation as human services professionals to use programming that worked. So with that long-winded explanation, what I need you to do in this learning plan is twofold. One is find an agency that you're connected with, that you're passionate about, or that you're interested in. Learn about them. Present what it is that they do, and tell me why they work. Okay? So you cannot just copy and paste off a website. You cannot just just find something and just copy and paste it. You're going to need to make some phone calls. You're going to need to do some research, and you're going to want to present that. But the biggest component is telling me, why does this program work? Why are they still using it? Or if they haven't determined that they're evidence-based, what do they need to get there? There's another term that they use called promising practice. So that means they're on their way to being evidence-based. What they're doing seems to be hopeful and working, but they aren't quite proven to be evidence-based. That's acceptable too. But you need to tell me why it's working. The other discussion board is looking up an actual program that is evidence-based or promising practice and presenting that as well. So what I really need you to do is take some time to learn your resources. We have a lot of students in Green Bay, we have a lot of students up north, we have a lot of students all over, so it'll be really cool to learn about different resources that are in the area, something maybe that you're excited about or you're passionate about. But keeping in mind that you have to absolutely touch on the evidence-based component. If you miss that, you will miss your points. So just keeping that in mind, that that's what this learning plan is about, is interventions and the effectiveness of interventions. So keeping that in mind, I hope you enjoy kind of getting your hands wet and seeing that this is an amazing field that we can truly, truly make a difference in, truly change and impact lives. But it's up to us to make sure that we're doing the research to provide the services that work. So we're preventing families from coming back into the system. We're also preventing the waste of dollars and resources. So I hope you enjoy this learning plan as much as I enjoy it. I look forward to learning. Every semester I get to learn about resources that I wasn't aware of. So that excites me too. So it's not only good for you, it's good for me, it's good for all of us to be connected, and you never know. These particular agencies might open a door to an internship, a field placement, a possible job. So keep that in mind too. What am I interested in? What do I want to learn more about? Can I make some connections? Can I start volunteering here? Things like that. So just keeping that in mind. I hope you enjoy this learning plan. It's a joy.